First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much, Frau Dr. Dreo and the university for inviting me to speak because, as was mentioned, the majority of my career has been spent either as a soldier or in support of soldiers, providing communications or providing cyber services. So coming to places like the University of the Bundeswehr is like coming home to me. So I really feel welcome here. So thank you very much. And I also feel that the defense community, the global defense community, has been a leader in cybersecurity for a long time. Right? And some of the things we need today is more leadership. And one of those reasons is that the pace of change is putting a lot of stress on old problems. We've always faced these type of problems: data leakage, data loss, data theft. They've been around for years. But the pace of change, our customers, the people that you support in NATO or in public sector agencies or in the commercial world, they're running fast to new technologies, to new services. And you see that every day. Shadow IT, for example, buying new services. And it's not a commercial problem, it's also in the defense community and it's in the public sector community. So our customers collectively are running very, very fast. So we in the defense community in particular has to exhibit a lot of leadership here, and events like this certainly go a long way in promoting that leadership. So it's very important that we provide that leadership. Secondly, we're not learning a lot of the lessons that we should, or as many lessons as we should. So while we're running fast to new technologies, cloud, IoT, big data platforms, we're not learning all the security lessons that we should have over the years. For example, IoT gateways going into smart homes, no passwords, or very weak passwords, most likely no passwords, no security in place on the devices. Big data platforms, thankfully, there's some security going into those platforms, but if you look at all the interoperability, all the different types of software that go into making your security analytics work, there's a lot of vulnerability there from both an assurance perspective as well as a interoperability perspective. So we're not learning as much, although thankfully we've come a long way from the time that I started in about '97 in cyber, where our first job was to make somebody spell cyber. That was our first mission. Now we've come a long way where we're embedding more security as platforms go out the door, but we're still not learning all the lessons that we can. So the defense community as a whole can provide some of that leadership. I know some of the previous speakers have talked quite a bit about the threat and their capability. I see this certainly as another stressor on all the platform, another stress into the platforms that we're putting out there, into our jobs, into protecting the data. And I won't go into all these attributes because they've been mentioned, but I will mention one thing about this particular attack. Right? Everyone is familiar with the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, but there was also a cyber component, of course, and this statistic stood out to me, and it also stood out to the French government. So they talked about how 17,000 so websites were simultaneously DOSed relatively quickly or during the Charlie Hebdo incident. So what that says about the threat is, one, they can operate with a lot more speed than we can in some cases. Right? They can come together, loose collaborations of groups can come together and have an impact. And normally you wouldn't talk too much about denial of service attack, but only because the French government commented on this, that they've never seen something like that before. And so there's another first there in terms of the impact and the threat and how they can have that impact quickly. And I think it also speaks to a little bit about the Afghanistan mission, to where there's a lot of loose groups coming together to have an effect on things. And I think we can learn quite a bit from the counterinsurgency tactics that we've learned all throughout the last 10 years and apply those to cyber, and how we have to embed security down further into our organizations, not have everything centralized, because the threat is operating in a decentralized manner, and that's how we have to combat that. I have my own clicker, I don't know why I'm reaching over. Second, I wanted to take a look at one one particular incident. And it's not a defense incident, but it's a representative of where a lot of our customers, including public sector agencies, stand in their ability to withstand an attack. First off, with the Sony incident, there's a lot of things coming together here. It demonstrates the interdependencies that we face in cyber. One is, so the attack happened in November or so, November 24th, around that time frame, and the impact from business impact to personal impact to geopolitical impact only took about 2 weeks, actually about 10 days before some of the statements were made by the US and by North Korea. So that those interdependencies, and that's a small example. If this were something critical infrastructure, critical transportation, or other types of infrastructure, those dependencies could have had a much greater effect than affecting some movie releases and things like that. So the interdependencies that we have are kind of unknown. And if you look at even some of your information out in your booth, Gabi, you display the transportation network, right, and how we need to protect that. But there's so many interdependencies there that an effect in one area is going to have an effect in another area very, very quickly, and we need to be aware of that. That's why we need to talk about resilience and versus just point solutions and so forth. So the interdependencies are there, and it was displayed in this particular incident. The other is that Sony has been attacked for, I don't know, for the last, as long as I can remember, Sony has been a victim of attacks. They've been the poster child for hacktivism for a long time. But they weren't prepared. They weren't doing they self-admitted that they were not doing the basics. So you can use this as an example of what not to do in a cyber incident. And the talks about resilience, particularly in terms of the mission, how our cybersecurity must enable the mission to continue. The first response that Sony took was to stop using computers. Basically told their employees not to use their systems. They stopped using USB drives. They basically shut down their operation, which is something you don't want to do. As cybersecurity professionals, we need to be the people saying, yes, we need to be enabling the business to continue no matter what is going on, or the mission to continue no matter what is happening in the cyber domain. So there's some good lessons learned here, as well as there's a plethora of more incidents, of course, to learn from, and they keep getting faster. So in my particular role, both privately and within Intel, we're advising customers to how to be more resilient, how to deploy better cyber defense. And I took a step back and I thought about what is the journey that we're driving people towards. And we were able to categorize some of the capabilities into a maturity model, which I call the Cyber Resilience Assurance Framework. And if you look at this very simple representation, most customers have started out at this compliance level, right? I characterize things in terms of culture, architecture, and insights, and I'll explain that in just a second. But most customers have started off here at this device level, at the device-driven level, right? And I find a lot in European companies that we're advising today, they're closer to this compliance level than we need them to be, because your mission is often has a lot of interdependencies as well, and we need to step up the game in terms of small, medium enterprise security and other types of getting the word out to these enterprises that they need to mature themselves. So most customers are somewhere between this data-driven and resilience level, right? They want to get better. The pace of change is too fast. So borrowing a phrase from the military, I was happy to see Gabi used a famous phrase called KISS, keeping it simple. There's another famous phrase called crawl, walk, run. And you first teach a soldier to crawl, then you teach them to walk, and then you teach them to run. And right now, a lot of people are crawling. We need to teach them to walk a little bit faster. And then eventually we need to teach them to run. And I think some of the things that were talked about this morning are in that bleeding edge space, getting people to run. Integrated architecture, a lot of use of security analytics to drive decision making are at the top end of the scale. But I just wanted to give you a few examples today of how we can get people to be more resilient by focusing on culture, architecture, and insights. So just in a simple representation, what I found in advising customers is they're somewhere in this journey, but we need to give them the practical program to move forward. And that practical program starts with the strategy. It starts with understanding what the threat is, and I talk about a lot about intelligence, and not just threat intelligence, but intelligence as a strategy. We move forward into talking about assessing where they are in the realm of culture, their cultural maturity in terms of cyber, their architectural maturity, and their ability to use data, which is inside, their ability to see inside their organization. And that comes down to their ability to understand how things are operating and how they can use data to better their cyber defense. And then we talk about some key solutions that you have to do today. And if you notice at the top there, you see spear phishing, and you say, well, you're never really gonna, that's not really a big problem. So, but it's for the last 10 years, it is the most effective attack method for the most sophisticated attackers around. From my own personal experience, I ran the U.S. Army CERT for a long time. I'll give you a few more examples in a minute. But phishing was very sophisticated. We had people who penetrated our personal accounts, and that really brings it home when you can feel an adversary being that close to you. So phishing is very effective. We were not going to stop social engineering, but we can stop the effects. And a lot of customers today, public sector or enterprise, are not doing the best they can in combating that major attack methods. So I look at these as some practical steps. And this is what I hear from the customers. They want practical steps in getting better. They want to get better. They want to know how to do it. So we're trying to help them get there. So starting with looking at being threat focused, and this was the time frame that I worked in or managed the U.S. Army CERT, which covered a large swath of territory, and I recognize a few people from those days. Particular Bundeswehr CERT is here. Some of the groundbreaking work there. But some of these incidents, I've taken off the code names, the ones that were not public, because I knew we were reporting it. So anyway, just to give you an example of the things that we faced. And back in 2000, 2001, that was our compliance time frame. We looked at those worms and those viruses and so forth, and we just wanted to keep systems available. But if you go forward, in 2004, we were really faced with a lot of different types of APTs. It's the first time we started to categorize those into campaigns. And there was a lot of lessons learned that we weren't doing enough in defense in depth. Moving forward, 2006 and 2008 time frame, more sophisticated attacks, we weren't doing enough intelligence. We weren't sharing that fast enough. We weren't getting it into cyber defense fast enough. And then the last two there, some of you may remember Buckshot Yankee. I know some of you do. This was our Sony, where we did the wrong thing. We stopped the mission to do cyber defense. We stopped USBs. We stopped using computers because of a problem. That was the wrong thing. But it also gave us a lot of insight that we weren't doing enough in terms of closed networks. And a lot of you run closed networks, either in the military or in public agencies or in enterprises, financials, for example. And we're not doing enough security on those environments. It's very, very important. And the final one, which was really an eye-opener for me, was on the insider threat. And this, again, showed us where we had a lot of weaknesses. And I think this historical perspective, a lot of our customers are in one stage or another of this. A lot of your customers are in one stage or another of learning here. And I think we as the defense community have that historical perspective to go and teach those lessons to our customers. I think when you can be more threat focused, you can also prioritize. And I made a representation here of an attack model. Some of you know as the kill chain. This is the external model. But there's also one for insiders that is equally effective. It was developed by Carnegie Mellon and the FBI. So it's equally effective in what it does. But what this outlines are the different stages of attack. And what you can do as cybersecurity professionals is advise customers where they need to have those controls, where the most effect is going to be, where they can prioritize their current investments to reduce the risk the most, where they can prevent, where the attacker is most exposed. But I also believe you can use these models as measuring sticks, because it's a key problem that I find in a lot of agencies or enterprise, that we're not measuring our security capability effectively. And I think when you can look at the threat in this way and look at your cybersecurity capability against these stages, you have the opportunity to measure that. In my time as the CERT manager, we always used to count things. We used to tell how many things we blocked and how many things we stopped. But it wasn't having the effect. And I think when you put that measurement in terms of how well and how fast you're operating to defend the business, then your leaders will listen in terms of the metrics. There's a lot talked about intelligence these days especially, but I like to think about it in terms of a strategy. A lot of our customers are looking at threat intelligence and how they can use that better, particularly for detection capability. But what we're advising customers on is how to build a strategy for intelligence, which talks about the process, the collection mechanisms, the analysis, the storage, the exchange. It talks about what are the different requirements that are effective for intelligence. And I'll take one example here under sources. And you notice we say global, community, and local sources. There's a lot of intelligence that resides in the defense community, and that's getting into cyber defense quicker than it ever has been. But our own research shows that the majority of samples that we collect as Intel are, let's say, over 95% are only seen in one place. So that means that they're either very targeted, which is true, but it also means that they can change very rapidly. So your ability to have organic intelligence is very, very important, the ability to generate that. And I think security analytics are going that path. Right? Malware analytics at scale and data analytics at scale are going that path. They're helping us generate that local intelligence that is very, very necessary. But the most effective way is to get that intelligence into some sort of decision support process as fast as possible. And I know there's a lot of efforts in terms of standardization of formats like sticks and TAXII and so forth, but and those need to be adopted as much as possible. We see a lot of adoption of that in the defense community, the public sector community, as well as now as in the enterprise. And we as providers are listening to that and trying to enable our technology to absorb that information so you can get that intelligence faster into defensive technology. I think when we talk about defense in depth right now, we talk about resilience right now, we're talking about defense in depth. And this is not new to this community in particular, but it is not done a lot in a lot of the agencies and a lot of the enterprises. And these layers here, most of which are outlined in a very simple document that the UK government produced called the Top 10 Steps to Cybersecurity. And when we take that very practical guidance and we apply it to whatever domain you have, or whatever system you have, we'll find a lot of gaps in those controls. And so I think when we're advising customers, we're talking about every system and every operating environment having a defense in depth capability. And this is where we need to get to in order to get to that trusted environment. So we're doing this very well in, say, our office environments and our enterprises, but we're not doing it as well in ICT environments or in other types of newer operating areas. So we're trying to, but that needs to improve. I put one stage in here that's not on the top 10 steps, and that's within hardware, because it's a new area for us in particular. When we were purchased by Intel, we never really thought about the chipset and its role in security. But today that is becoming more prevalent in building resilience in our systems. So we're looking at how we can enable both. Provide security enabling functions like faster encryption or faster analytics, but also trying to reduce the attack surface for malicious attackers. So that's a new and emerging space, and how we bridge those things together is very, very important going forward. Where we look at advising customers on the next element here. So architecture is one thing, defense in depth. And we look at the data, being very data-centric is important, understanding where the critical data sources are, both in what can have the most impact on business. And this particular slide is from IT at Intel, and how we approach as a company, how we live this particular strategy. We very much allow BYOD to happen, right? So we run very fast towards risk, right? But we balance those controls. Prevention, detection, and response is a mantra that we do. We also focus a lot on data security, and we look at it in different types of zones. And what I find in the customers is that a lot of customers don't know where their critical data is, and they don't know what the systems are that can affect the mission the most. So looking at that in terms of different trust zones within your agency or within your enterprise is an important way to divide security or to design security. We see even some of the major enterprises that we've consulted with, there's not a lot of internal segmentation so I won't give an example, but a major pharma company that we talked to, scaringly enough, there wasn't, different types of research was very, very accessible from other types of ordinary systems. That's not a good thing. So those type of systems, there's a lot of internal segmentation, understanding where your critical data sources are, and then leaning forward towards the more trusted state, seeing how we can use granular identification mechanisms, granular identity controls to really allow more flexibility for our users. And looking finally into insights and operations is kind of the final area. And this was part of the framework, the different maturity levels for insights. And today, in a lot of different companies, small or large, we're still somewhere in between signature and intelligence driven. The major conversations that we would have with customers are, how do I get intelligence into detection faster than I did before? Or how do I make best use of the technology that I have? What are the good signatures that I need to use? But increasingly, we're talking more on the behavioral driven side. How to use analytics on big data on top of Hadoop in particular to generate more insights and more indicators from different types of data. And we actually had a particular research on net flow analysis, which I saw in your slides, Gabi. That's pretty important because increasingly the security data is not what you need to look at. It's more of the operational data that you use, DNS and net flow and things like that can be used for analysis. So again, this is the maturity curve that customers are going through, and we have to be able to understand that, advise them how to get forward, and then what's the technology and processes and expertise that they need to make that maturity jump. Operations, there's a few discussions about operations earlier today. Again, another critical area for our customers. How do they really get better at security operations? And this is really the combination of things. All that architecture and insights come together inside security operations, where these teams and this technology that to support these teams has to drive decisions at a lot faster level than it has before. But unfortunately, a lot of customers think of security operations as a product. I've heard the term, sock in a box, or in relation to a SIM, and that just is not right. It's not going to give them the capability that they need to have. So security operations is a multi-layer approach. So we focus on particularly making sure that customers have the right sensors. So we go back to that threat awareness where we align sensors to those different attack models to make sure that you have the right data sources in place so when an attack happens, you at least have forensic data available. In terms of analytics, we look at that in terms of data and malware in particular, because being able to rip apart a very complicated piece of malware is a critical function for a lot of operations today. So both in terms of data and malware, those are critical capabilities that the operations centers need to have. And then finally, I'll close with the final area, which is culture, and perhaps the most important. Because we won't make cyber defense resilient nor trusted, or we won't make the business resilient or trusted without a culture change that occurring within many agencies and many enterprises. And when you talk about culture change, you're talking about people, behavioral change. And it's not just the users, and we never call the users stupid, because that's what we want. We want the users to be part of the decision-making process. We want them to be a sensor for us. We want to say, if you recognize a phishing email, we want you to report it. And a statistic from my own time in the CERT was we used to measure the effectiveness to some degree of our different detective tools. And all the time, self-reported incidents on phishing were one of the most successful censoring tools that we had. So that's very important. Make the users part of the decision-making process. Don't make them your enemy. But there's a lot more. There's a lot of different types of users in the enterprise, and you have to embed security capability across here. And one good lesson learned is to look at certifications. Right? Certifications not just for your security professionals, but for your administrators and your developers, and perhaps even in your leaders and managers. That's one good way to make everybody aware, not just aware of security, but we want to make them ready. We want to make them prepared to go forth and do it without a lot of instruction. So that's an effective way to look at certifications in your own enterprise. Use it as a cultural change mechanism. And the other method is to look at how users make data classification decisions. Right? If those decisions are in front of them, and you continually make them part of the process, again, that's another element to having cultural change. So I'd just like to close with this as, as we began with leadership and we're ending with leadership, this is our job to do. So just a small taste of the framework going forward. I hope you maybe can adopt, and if you like more questions, I'd be happy to answer those in the booth. Thank you very much.